Tangent, Granola Fascism, Love and Light, Star Children, Nama Slay. Part 1, the QAnon Shaman. So I don't know if you guys remember this, but on January 6th, 2021, a bunch of people stormed the US Capitol building in what Azealia Banks described as meth behavior. Some of the most iconic images of the January 6th insurrection were of a man in red, white, and blue face paint, a fur hat and horns, carrying a 6-foot spear with an American flag. This person the media termed the QAnon Shaman. He was later arrested and then briefly imprisoned for his role in the insurrection. And then news came out that he had been refusing to eat the prison food because it wasn't organic. That's odd, many people thought. What kind of Trump fanatic is this? Don't these people hate when things are organic? Doesn't Donald Trump eat fried chicken with a fork and a knife on his private jet? Didn't they spend dozens of hours of airtime ruthlessly mocking Michelle Obama's organic garden? What's the deal with the... Okay, we're doing Seinfeld. What's the deal with Jacob Chansley, aka the QAnon Shaman? Who is this man? Well, let's look at these tattoos. I'm seeing what looks like a tree of life, possibly the Nordic image of Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil? Is that how you say that? The tree of life. This Borromean knot of triangles is called a Volknut. It's an old Norse symbol that is usually used by white supremacists these days, but also sometimes by like nerds. That looks like a giant Mjolnir, a Thor's hammer. All this is neo-pagan Norse imagery, which has been associated with white nationalists for like decades. So all of that is to be expected. But Jacob Chansley also identifies as a shamanic practitioner and a bodhisattva.
As a shamanic practitioner, I have a hyperdimensional consciousness that stretches far beyond the bounds of my physical body. Do you know what a bodhisattva is?
Generally speaking, yeah. Sort of a spiritual figure of sorts that people may follow, yeah.
Well, kind of. It's a spiritual being that attains a certain level of enlightenment, but reincarnates over and over again consciously until the all of humanity is enlightened and brought into an ascended level of consciousness. I am a bodhisattva.
Chansley has previously claimed, quote, "What we did on January 6th in many ways was an evolution in consciousness, because as we marched down the street along these ley lines shouting USA or shouting things like freedom, we were actually affecting the quantum realm. In order to beat this evil occultic force, you need a light occultic force. You need a force that is on the side of God, of love, almost like on the side of the angels, as opposed to the demons." Okay, my initial question for this tangent is, how does an all-organic, hyperdimensional quantum bodhisattva end up storming the Capitol for QAnon? The answer sent me down rabbit holes within rabbit holes. I thought I wasn't in Kansas anymore, only to discover I had entered quantum Kansas. So I've come out of this a changed person, which is too bad, because I feel like this time last year, I was so close to ascending to 5D consciousness. You guys remember the psychedelics tangent? There I was, yapping about vibrations and mandalas and yin and yang energy. I feel like I was this close to enlightenment, but then I started researching Granola Fascism, and this tangent has completely disillusioned me with spirituality. As of making this video, I feel like I hate spirituality, I hate enlightenment, I hate God, and because you voted for this, it's your fault that I'm going to spend the rest of my life in Tamasic ignorance. Just kidding, it's fine. I'll just do more acid and consult the Akashic records. Part 2. All fascism is granola fascism. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. What do we mean by granola? Wikipedia defines granola as a food consisting of rolled oats, nuts, seeds, honey, or other sweeteners, such as brown sugar, and sometimes puffed rice, that's usually baked until crisped, toasted, and golden brown. Granola is literally a crunchy snack, but it came into prominence in the United States in the 1970s as part of the health food movement, part of a kind of general new age wellness moment in this country, when the revolutionary consciousness of the counterculture was sort of transformed into a more tranquilized form of hippie lifestyle. So when we say someone is granola or crunchy, we mean that they are far out, they're new age. They're woo-woo. Am I making myself clear? Granola means that someone likes spending time outdoors, and they probably put yogurt into bodily orifices other than the mouth. When I proposed this video topic, I was thinking of QAnon shamans and of like body fascist Instagram yoginis. But on further reflection and further research, there's actually a case to be made that fascism was always granola fascism. And by that I mean that fascism has always been concerned with health and fitness and fertility and spirituality. This is something that has been academically explored since at least 1985's The Occult Roots of Nazism, a book that explored the New Age spiritual beliefs of the Third Reich. Nazis had their own form of occultism called Aryosophy or Aryan wisdom, which was this kind of mix of yoga and Nordic neo-paganism and Eastern religions and Hermetic Kabbalah. This is why the imagery of the Third Reich is associated with so many runes, the swastika, obviously. There's this branch of Aryosophy called theozoology, an extremely sinister pseudoscience created by Jörg Lanz von Liebenfels, which claimed that the Aryan race descended from interstellar beings, whereas the lower races, or quote-unquote sodomite apelings, Jesus Christ, were the result of breeding between humans and ape men? Okay. There was this preoccupation with preventing miscegenation, the famous racial purity that the Nazis are so well known for. The theozoologist Liebenfels himself was a big proponent of castrating racially inferior men, which I think speaks very loudly to the kind of insecurities and preoccupations that underlie this entire line of thinking. Cuckoldry. It always goes back to cuckoldry. I don't know what the deal is with cuckoldry, but everyone's obsessed with cuckoldry. Not everyone, but in the Dritte Reich, it's a lot of concern about cuckoldry. One thing I can't help but notice, though, is that this idea of the Aryan race descending from interstellar beings has a family resemblance to kind of New Age hippie beliefs about star children and like ancient aliens interbreeding with pre-modern civilizations. One Aryosophist idea was that the Aryan race are quote-unquote Hyperboreans. Hyperboreans were this ancient Greek idea of like this northern people that were descendants of the survivors of Atlantis. This is mentioned by Plato, for example. Personally, I think if the Nazis are survivors of Atlantis, then I wish that everyone had sunk. It was actually Liebenfels himself who was the first to use the swastika as a German nationalist symbol in the flag of the proto-fascist Order of the New Templars. Heinrich Himmler, an architect of the Holocaust and all around one of the most evil bastards that ever walked this planet, founded a organization called the Ahnenerbe, an SS think tank whose mission was to research the Nazi idea that the Aryan race was responsible for most of the important achievements in human history. So the Ahnenerbe tried to shore up evidence of a historical Aryan invasion or expansion. So, for example, they wanted to claim that the Buddha was of the Aryan race. They sent expeditions to Tibet to measure skulls. Fascists to this day admire the so-called wisdom of this French woman who named herself Savitri Devi. She wanted to synthesize Hinduism and Nazism and thought that Hitler was an avatar of Vishnu. Honestly, Europeans should never have been allowed to know about Hinduism. It's obviously too much for the European mind to comprehend. Fascist occultism has crunchy predecessors in Western esotericism, that is, Gnosticism, Neoplatonism, Mesmerism, Spiritualism, German and English Romanticism, the Theosophy movement of Helena Blavatsky, and the Anthroposophy of Rudolf Steiner. All of these esoteric traditions represent an attempt at a third way between science and Orthodox religion. I guess I should explain what esoteric means. I don't want to be condescending, but not everyone has a humanities degree. Some people did something useful with their lives. In religion and spirituality, there's a distinction between esoteric and exoteric, which are Greek words basically meaning inside, esoteric, and outside, exoteric. So, for example, a philosopher in ancient Greece might have had public teachings, the exoteric teachings, and secret teachings, the esoteric teachings. In more practical terms, exoteric means normie. Mainstream orthodox religious belief and practice is exoteric, whereas esoteric refers to people who are on some kind of spiritual journey, but who think they're too smart to go to church with the other sheeple. In fascist esotericism, the big name, in my opinion, is the Italian Julius Evola, if you prefer your fascismo with a Mediterranean twist. Julius Evola was born Giulio Cesare, which name was apparently not Roman enough, so he had to become Julius. Okay, buddy. He also looks like a Batman villain with his monocle. Ridiculous. Evola was a self-proclaimed super fascist and advocate of spiritual racism. Evola is cited as an influence by Trump's former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, and is one of the favorite philosophers of a Nordic fascist YouTuber who you may have heard of called The Golden One. For the sake of this tangent, because I love you guys so much that I'm willing to degrade myself in any way imaginable, I actually read Evola's book, Revolt Against the Modern World. I feel kind of filthy even owning this, but you know, that's part of the fun. Honestly, reading Evola has actually been kind of like almost like refreshing to me because he just says the quiet part out loud. He just tweets it out. I'm so used to 21st century fascists who like obfuscate all of their beliefs in this ever shifting cloud of nonsense that it's honestly like kind of a relief when you want to find a fascist who finally just says like, oh yeah, I believe in racism. Of course I believe in racism. Like, thank you for just saying it instead of just using a million dog whistles and saying a bunch of nonsense about like identitarian like, I don't know. I hate that. I'm so tired of that nonsense. It's kind of surreal to read Evola because he's like formally theorizing a lot of ideas that I've only really experienced as memes. For example, this whole idea of tradition versus modernity, like as in red vern to tradition. This is Evola. Evola's influence is gigantic on internet fascism. I feel like it doesn't get talked about enough. Evola kind of blends all pre-modern cultures from around the world into this monolithic concept of quote-unquote tradition, which he contrasts positively with the degenerate modern world. Evola advocates a cyclical model of time with 4 stages. Does that sound familiar to anyone who watched the Generations tangent? Evola adopts, well, what he claims, I'm not going to say that any of this actually has anything to do with Hinduism because I know that European fascists using Hindu concepts tend to be very sketchy. So I'm not saying this is what Hinduism says. I'm saying this is what Evola thinks Hinduism says. Evola adopts what he says is a 4-stage Hindu model of cyclical time, and he claims that we are currently in the Kali Yuga, that is the darkest, most chaotic age of the cycle, and that a new kind of glorious turning awaits us, which is actually pretty comparable to kind of American New Age claims that we're experiencing, or at least maybe in the 60s and 70s, we're experiencing a dawning of the age of Aquarius that based on sort of an astrological cyclical view of time. Evola's super fascist claim is that this new age that is dawning will restore a mythical Aryan race. So we have this kind of anti-Darwinian fixation on a pre-modern age of gods from which modern races have supposedly degenerated to varying degrees. So whereas Darwinism says that humans kind of evolved from lower species, we climbed out of the mud, fascist spiritualists and also New Age granola people tend to claim that it's the opposite, that we fell out of the sky, which is usually the pre-modern claim, that humans are kind of fallen angels, as opposed to the Darwinian idea that we are risen beasts. Another granola thread in Evola's thinking is ecofascism. So that would be a focus on the soil part of blood and soil. Though honestly, as a spiritual racist, I think Evola might not agree with blood and soil. It would be spirit and soil. He's not claiming to be scientific. He's trying to revolt against science, right? Because science is part of modernity. So he's claiming that what makes the Aryan race is a kind of spiritual superiority rather than like a genetic one or like an IQ kind of claim. There's a lot of intricacies to racist thought that I feel like this is not me defending racists. I'm just saying, like, if you want to understand racism, like, you have to understand that racism is more nuanced than people tend to think. White supremacist thinking is usually not as simple as white supremacists, they just love all white people and they hate all non-white people. No, that's not the case at all. They actually hate most white people because they see most white people in the modern era as degenerate race traitors. And they actually admire a lot of people from non-white races who they see as like strong, as like champions of their race. So for example, on the Golden Ones YouTube channel, there is a video quoting, oh, look who it is. It is the French Nazi spiritualist Savitri Devi on Genghis Khan, who the Golden One loves. Though on a repeat watch of this video, it actually appears that Devi is claiming that Genghis Khan is Aryan, a blue-eyed hero. Which, like, why am I even engaging with this, right? Fuck these people. Well, part of the reason I think it's important to do that is because if people don't have an accurate understanding of what racists think, then they're unable to recognize racism because they'll be like, oh, how could he possibly be racist? He loves Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan isn't white. And it's like, well, that's not really how racists think, right? Like, you have to get into the details. It actually kind of matters. You have to learn the intricacies of fascist nonsense. That's what we're trying to do today. Okay, so all the intricacies of eco-fascism are fully on display in Evola, who diagnoses a core problem of modernity as simultaneous overpopulation and underpopulation. Underpopulation is, of course, a problem in the Aryan race. The Aryan race is just not reproducing enough. Constant fertility problems with the Aryan race. Many such complaints. And on the other hand, Evola complains about the overpopulation of the Untermenschen, those sodomite apelings whom Evola compares to a metastasizing cancer or teeming worms, and which Evola's modern-day devotees still use as a pretext for banning immigration. 21st century eco-fascism usually blames the other for environmental problems, so far-right fascist figures often kind of claim a type of environmentalism. It's just that it's always someone else's fault, right? It's China's fault, it's the third world's fault, it's the globalists' fault. But all of this should encourage us to be a little bit cautious about how we approach environmentalism, because there are people claiming to speak for environmentalism who do so in a way that speaks of humans as like a virus, and often this kind of thinking ends up being racist and ends up blaming like the teeming third world masses or something for environmental problems. You have to remember that it's blood and soil. Just because someone is claiming to care about the soil does not mean that they are progressive. I know it's cliche to point this out, but Hitler was in fact a vegetarian, as was at times Richard Wagner and Friedrich Nietzsche. This was very much a common notion in late 19th, early 20th century German thought, a kind of crunchy granola strain of romanticism, natural food, fitness, vegetarianism, the Nibelungenlied, all the classics, all the hits. So we have in German and Italian fascism a focus on fitness, health, fertility, and spiritual syncretism, the occult, which is a little bit awkward because doesn't all of that also describe American New Age spirituality and wellness culture? Part 3. New Age as fascism's doppelganger. Now I need to be very clear what I am and am not saying here, because I do worry that people are going to caricature this tangent as me saying that New Age spirituality is fascist, or hippies are fascist, or fitness is fascist, or anything like that. No, I'm not saying that. I am not saying that New Age spirituality is fascist. What I do want to say, though, is similar to what Naomi Klein says in her recent book, Doppelgänger, which describes the right-wing conspiracy theorist world as a through-the-looking-glass double of the crunchy granola left. And the most concerning aspect of this situation is that crunchy granola feelings, whether left or right, can kind of be played on by conspiracy theorists and lead to what Naomi Klein calls diagonalism, which is the breakdown of traditional left-right distinctions that occurred especially during the coronavirus pandemic, uniting people across the political spectrum in an anti-science, anti-vaccine cause. Now, I should probably define New Age. New Age is a mildly derogatory term for a Western spiritual awakening beginning in England and the United States in the 1970s. New Age involves a syncretism of pre-modern ideas, which in some ways resembles fascist occultism, although it doesn't necessarily adopt fascist politics. So New Age is an umbrella term for a collection of new religious movements in the West, which syncretize a very wide range of occult, esoteric, indigenous, and Eastern religions, as well as like psychedelic drug culture and eclectic pseudoscience. We're talking about yoga, Reiki, essential oils, Anunnaki from the planet Nibiru, Atlantis, 5D, 5G, the Illuminati, Ayurveda, crystals, channeling, angels, homeopathy, QAnon, tarot, wellness, the Akashic Records, psychedelics, cleanses, the anti-vax movement, energy healing, quantum healing, synergy, astrology, UFOs, chakras, herbal medicine, sacred geometry, ayahuasca, coffee enemas. New Age is a buffet approach to world religions mixed in with a little bit of clairvoyance, a little bit of telepathy, maybe even a little bit of necromancy. So I'm like overcome with anxiety as I'm filming this, because I feel like it kind of comes across like I'm trashing people's beliefs and religion. And who am I to judge your necromancy? And I have no right to do that because, like, do I have like a better system to replace the ideas that I'm trashing? No. And like people need to believe something, right? I'm not trying to be an asshole. I'm not trying to be contrarian. I'm not trying to be an annoying skeptic. I'm not telling people what to believe. I'm just asking questions. I'm sure all of us like some element of New Age. I mean, with such an expansive collection of concepts, virtually anyone is bound to like at least something in there. But taken together, New Age is like the religion of a certain class of like overeducated, rich white people, especially on the West Coast and Sedona. It often gets mixed up with the kind of like wellness capitalism of fitness culture and is sometimes malignant exoticism bordering on noble savage romanticization of pre-modern culture. The current avatar of all this is the musician Shannon Blake.
I've been chilling in the mountains of Peru, drinking ayahuasca with the shaman stew.
Who, in the month that I'm making this video, the entire internet has decided to hate. When the entire internet decides to hate one woman, I usually roll my eyes because that's kind of a suspect process that we go through on Cycle. But I do think Shannon Blake has been chosen as a target of hate because she represents a lot of like white people, quote unquote, spiritualist practices that are widely regarded as annoying and justifiably so.
I've been learning shit from the aliens, like how we're all connected to the pyramids. Used to be a broke bitch, now I'm cashing my checks cause I tapped into collective consciousness.
Another dimension of New Age involves a kind of synthesis of religion with science fiction. So you get UFO cults like Heaven's Gate, or like new mythologies about history like the Star Children idea, or the ancient aliens hypothesis that Anunnaki from the planet Nibiru like interbred with ancient people.
I've been learning shit from the aliens, like how we're all connected to the pyramids.
It's kind of just a high-tech version of the Hyperborean hypothesis. What are ancient Egyptian time travelers doing in Atlantis? Is it possible that JFK knew the secret and that's why? The globalists? New Age politics tends to begin with a disenchantment with modernism, though generally not with a disenchantment with capitalism, which is usually left out of the analysis.
Used to be a broke bitch, now I'm cashing my checks cause I tapped into collective consciousness.
I think it would be fair to say that New Age shares with fascism a nostalgia for a pre-modern golden age influenced by Romanticism. By Romanticism, I do mean the 19th century idea of Romanticism. Basically, as soon as the Industrial Revolution occurred, there was immediately an artistic and philosophical backlash against it, represented in England by poets like Wordsworth, or in the US by thinkers like Emerson and Thoreau. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with this type of romanticism. It's unfortunate, I think, that it's been abused so much. Though honestly, I don't really identify with this form of romanticism. I like my romanticism dark and decadent. Wordsworth can rub one out to a daffodil for all I care. As far as a cabin in the woods, I don't think I could tolerate that even as long as Thoreau did. I want to return to this concept of the shape of time. So remember, the super fascist Evola says that there has been a historical de-evolution of humanity from gods or ancient aliens, might be the more new agey way of putting it. On YouTube, there's a video adaptation of a creation myth written by Charles Eisenstein called A Gathering of the Tribe, which tells a new agey kind of ancient aliens origin story for humanity.
Once upon a time, a great tribe of people lived in a world far away from ours. They lived in a state of enchantment and joy. My friends, she said, there is a world that needs our help. It is called Earth. You will be separated from the wonder and beauty of our world, and from the love that bathes us all. You will be told in a million ways that a world of destruction, drudgery, anxiety, and degradation is normal. A memory of your true origin will be encoded in your DNA.
In a way, it's kind of like Aristophanes' fable in Plato's Symposium, right? Where he talks about, this is the myth about the people divided in half, and what erotic longing is the desire for being reunited with your other half. Except in this creation myth, it's new agey, so it's like, it's aliens. Aliens sent us to Earth, and now we want to be reunited with the aliens. Sliving. I've noticed certain patterns in a kind of quote-unquote apolitical critique of modernity that lends itself to either new age or to fascist reaction, but not to Marxist or leftist politics. And I want to point that out, but I'm already worried about attacking people's religion, and now I'm attacking people's artistic preferences. Am I just determined to make everyone hate me? I feel like this is a mean tangent. Like, I'm making so many enemies. In my notes, I'm looking at this list of artists that I'm now supposed to criticize, but I'm like too timid to actually do it, because if I criticize them, then what if people criticize me, and I can't handle that? Look, I'm not saying these artists are bad. I'm just saying that their art, for me, represents a kind of critique of modernity that is kind of alarmingly shallow, maybe, in its analysis, and therefore vulnerable to misuse. The animator Steve Cutts has many millions of views on YouTube for these videos that present this kind of dystopic view of modernity. The most notorious one is the music video for the Moby song Are You Lost in the World Like Me, which presents a very what if phones but too much, I'm 14 and this is deep kind of view of the dystopian nature of modernity. Behold the vanity of woman. Groundbreaking. Recurring themes in these animations are that industrial agriculture is bad, public transit is bad and disgusting, junk food is bad, big pharma is bad, taking pills is bad, taking selfies is bad, phones are bad, work is bad. Phones are so bad. Phones are bad. Phones are bad. Women are bad. But you know what's really bad? Fat people. I don't like this. I don't know. Like, I agree with some of these things. I especially am inclined to agree with the kind of critique of industrial agriculture, that this is like a horrible abuse of sentient animals. But the way this genre of art consistently uses fatness as a symbol of gluttony and decadence and the horrors of modernity really kind of alarms me, because to me, this feels like what is called body fascism. The term body fascism refers to a set of ideas and sentiments in fitness culture that kind of treat fatness as a symbol of moral failure and treat healthy, read thin, athletic bodies as virtuous and kind of more deserving of life. There's often a strong classist undercurrent to this way of seeing the world that, for me, is associated with Jamie Oliver, the celebrity chef who has these videos about chicken nuggets. Dan Olson did a whole video about this where he argues that chicken nuggets are like this dirty, vile food that's making us all unhealthy. And like, look how terrible it is that children will eat chicken nuggets, even though they've seen that it's made with the dirty, unclean parts of the bird. Behold these swine swollen on fast food and big pharma. I realize body fascism is like a little bit of a hyperbole, but I still think that fascism as a kind of generic derogatory term is still warranted here, because this kind of thinking can turn really ugly and kind of eugenicist very quickly. Naomi Klein describes this experience she had while canvassing in Canada, where she stopped at this like hippie house with like sandalwood incense burning and statues of devas in the window, and some like white woman wearing yoga pants comes out, and they get to talking about politics, and this woman brings up that she's like a single issue anti-vaccine passport voter. And I guess Naomi kind of tries to be like, well, you know, it's great that you're healthy and that, you know, your immune system can just reject COVID or whatever it is that people think they can do. But like, some people have compromised immune systems. And this woman says, I think those people should die. And that sort of thing does sound a little bit like eugenics. And unfortunately, digging into the history of fitness and even yoga as we in the Western world know it, eugenics is not a kind of new development in these areas. In the first years of the 20th century, the German bodybuilder Eugene Sandow toured the world promoting what was called at the time physical culture, what we would now call fitness. Eugene is not his birth name, it's a name he gave himself. And according to the authors of the book Conspirituality, he named himself after eugenics. This guy was apparently received as a celebrity when he visited India, where physical culture had some influence in the development of what we now think of as yoga. That is, yoga as asanas, poses that are performed as a form of fitness. This is in contrast with yoga as a like 2,000 plus year old tradition of spirituality, where yoga, like as a Hindu practice, was traditionally associated with meditation, concentration. Yoga is a cognate of the English word yoke, Indo-European. It's crazy. So yoga is a discipline that aims towards uniting the human mind with the divine and towards training concentration. But as a form of exercise, it has been incorporated into a Western culture of quote unquote wellness that assigns moral value to health and fitness and thinness. And unfortunately, during the coronavirus pandemic, the kind of ugly undercurrents of this culture really surfaced. And anyone who has a little bit of a eugenics tendency really kind of brought that out during those years. We have Canadian hippies talking about how disabled people deserve to die. I've observed a very sinister handshake taking place between the anti-disabled people and the anti-fat people and the anti-trans people, where the shared obsession is fertility, a classic fascist neurosis. You have the golden one promoting the no-fap movement.
If you imagine your ancestors are watching you, they see you fapping ferociously to another man ramming a woman. And if you want some motivation as to not do this, you can just meditate upon the amount of energy and vitality that your dragon's breath contains.
Tucker Carlson released that insane video on scrotum tanning. The New Age slogan, mind, body, spirit, sounds like it's full of love and light, but there's a potentially sinister interpretation of this that implies that a defective body equals a defective spirit. Someone who is disabled or immunocompromised must be that way because of a spiritual defect. In her book Natural Causes, Barbara Ehrenreich argues that body fascism is actually a freak consequence not of a New Age mind, body, spirit unity, but of traditional Cartesian mind-body dualism. Specifically, fitness culture often emphasizes these phrases like mind over matter, pain is weakness leaving the body, that amount to a kind of submission of the body to the mind, a dominance of the mind over the body. You could call it sadism of the mind, masochism of the body. It's maybe similar to the so-called holy anorexia of certain Christian mystics for whom their frail, starved bodies reflected spiritual discipline, spiritual strength. This is not by any means exclusive to New Age thinking. It's in a lot of Christian thinking in the US as well. The Netflix documentary The Way Down discusses a Christian weight loss cult led by Gwen Shamblin in Tennessee, where again you have this idea that being thin equals being healthy equals being the spiritual elect. And I assume all of this is correlated with pure unvaccinated semen. If you break down New Age thinking to its most brutally simplistic elements, what you get is the 2006 best-selling book The Secret. Quote, remember that your thoughts are the primary cause of everything. It's literally just magical thinking, wishful thinking, the idea that you can manifest reality through your thoughts. It's a denial of Freud's reality principle, the idea that you can return to this infantile state of thinking that if you will something, it becomes reality. Is literally just the hippie version of the Protestant American prosperity gospel, which claims that God favors the elect with material wealth. For people who need their magic to have a scientific veneer, we have Deepak Chopra, a quote-unquote quantum mystic who asserts that quantum physics somehow proves that magic is real. Deepak Chopra is literally just The Secret, but with a bunch of pseudoscientific hand-waving to convince people who think they're too smart to believe in The Secret. The authors of Conspirituality say that the fundamental New Age belief is thoughts create reality. The New Age political view is that, quote, inner peace will create world peace. This is a fundamentally anti-leftist notion. The argument is that there is no need for a collective political revolution because what's really needed is an individual spiritual revolution. So New Age thinking tends to dismiss politics as divisive. Because we can all agree that ancient Egyptian aliens are using 5G networks to space laser us straight back to Atlantis. The leftist documentarian Adam Curtis claims that the fitness culture of the 1980s replaced the revolutionary energy of 1960s social unrest. Naomi Klein calls the fitness obsession neoliberalism of the body. The perfectionistic ethics of fitness culture, which says that your domain of control is focused on your own body, is the result of self-care replacing politics entirely. And somehow, perfecting your body always seems to cost a lot of money. So in a way, Granola Fascism is just the sister of granola capitalism.
Used to be a broke bitch, now I'm cashing my checks cause I tapped into collective consciousness.
Part 4. Conspirituality. In their book, Conspirituality, Derek Barris, Matthew Remski, and Julian Walker describe conspirituality as a synthesis of New Age with conspiracy theory culture. They describe the tenets of conspirituality as, quote, nothing happens by accident, nothing is as it seems, and everything is connected. These are slogans more or less shared explicitly or implicitly between New Age spirituality and conspiracy theory culture. New Age and conspiracy thinking share a hunger for meaning. They feel that all of reality should be comprehensible to the intuition of any individual human mind. This is a way of seeing that is epistemically empowering. In Under the Eye of Power, Colin Dickey claims that conspiracy thinking paradoxically soothes anxiety. Conspiracy theories promote a seemingly terrifying view of society as controlled by secret cabals of Satanists and pedophiles, but these terrifying visions are soothing in that they are comprehensible. They supply meaning and make order out of chaos. Colin Dickey compares conspiracy thinking to polytheism. Conspiracy theories fill a void in meaning in secular democracies, replacing monarchy and God as the agentive forces behind what leftists would describe as systemic effects. Barris, Remsky, and Walker describe conspirituality as disaster spirituality, playing off Naomi Klein's concept of disaster capitalism. The idea being that conspirituality offers some consolation in the form of meaning and narrative explanation when terrifying events rip our world apart. So during the coronavirus pandemic, we saw more conspiracy theorizing than I have ever seen since 9/11 in the United States, which was the last time that something so major seemed to threaten the predictable order of society. Here's a conspiracy theory meme from the 2000s that I've thought about like once a week for the last decade and a half. The occult numerology of 9/11. The meme explains the meaning of 9/11 using numerology, tarot, Kabbalah, satanic geometry. It's easy to laugh this sort of thing off as like schizoid rambling, but there's a fairly clear emotional logic behind the need to produce this type of explanation. People want to feel that they are in control of their own reality, that events are predictable, that disasters have meaning. And for a lot of people, Marxist, materialist explanations of the causes behind world events are sort of emotionally unsatisfying. And so pre-modern magical thinking is revived to kind of soothe that anxiety. It's an emotional desperation that's unfortunately very easy to exploit. So Remsky, for example, who is a survivor of multiple cults, describes a kind of oscillation that cult leaders will often engage in between terrifying their followers, usually demonstrating to them how scary the outside world is, and soothing the followers, reassuring them that inside the sect, the cult, the group, the family, they're safe, they're taken care of. Explanations for everything that occurs are on offer. The inner circle is a safe oasis. The coronavirus pandemic instigated an explosion of conspirituality, and we're still living in the aftermath of that. A lot of major celebrity commentators turned conspiritualists in the last few years. Obviously, Joe Rogan, not necessarily a conspiritualist himself, but sort of a blank slate of a man who has promoted a lot of conspirituality. Naomi Wolf, Naomi Klein's doppelganger, was a leading third-wave feminist who has turned conspiracy lunatic. She's now a regular guest on Steve Bannon's podcast. She tweets about how Belfast has pre-5G air that is still calm, still peaceful, restful, natural, like in the 70s. You know, Belfast in the 70s, a very calm, peaceful place. She did what in my opinion is one of the best tweets of all time, spiraling into despair over the vaccination of Stanley Bear. No! Russell Brand, a popular once leftist podcaster who has some allegations and has now gone full conspiracy theorist, ranting about the deep state on Rumble because YouTube demonetized him. Don't subscribe. Awaken. Christiane Northrup, apparently an actual doctor at one point and author of the best-selling Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom, is now a complete conspiracy theorist quack who uses tarot cards to diagnose illnesses and increase the flow of chi to the vagina. In 2020, she promoted a lot of QAnon-adjacent content and claims to have lived in Atlantis in a previous incarnation. Why is it always Atlantis? I feel like Atlantis keeps coming up. I completely disagree with everything Christiane Northrup is saying. Uphold germ theory, fuck Atlantis. But I do feel like we need to make a few concessions to alternative medicine here, because if we don't do that, then we lose the argument. Because the average person's experience with mainstream medicine is that it super fucking sucks. And I feel like it's important to empathize with that experience and understand it. If you want to read a critique of Western scientific medicine from someone who actually knows what they're talking about and is not a quack, I suggest Natural Causes by Barbara Ehrenreich, which describes how women in particular often have an experience with the mainstream medical system that is degrading and ineffective. There's a genuinely really ugly tradition of patriarchal gynecology and obstetrics that makes a lot of women rightfully skeptical about giving birth in hospital, and has led to a reemergence of midwives and doulas to fill these roles that are not being filled by the mainstream scientific medical establishment. Ehrenreich describes how med students are trained on dissecting corpses, which kind of inculcates an attitude of objectification that to actual conscious human patients is really alienating and objectifying to be on the receiving end of. You feel like your humanity is an inconvenience to the physician. I understand why people hate it, and I can really understand why they'd hate it in the case of something life-threatening like cancer. Imagine being unceremoniously told that you have breast cancer and need to get a double mastectomy and some torturous chemotherapy treatments. Good luck. That'll be $50,000. Like, yeah, it's not a mystery why someone in that situation would rather have a crystal healer give them actual human care and affection in a room with decent lighting. The problem, though, is that women's, and I guess also men's, justifiable skepticism about mainstream medicine is then abused by New Age charlatans. So we have Christiane Northrup saying that the germ theory of disease is a patriarchal big pharma myth, and she's still on YouTube telling her followers that IBS, chronic fatigue syndrome, thyroid disorders, obesity, diabetes, and breast cancer are caused by quote-unquote inflammation, which in turn is caused by energy vampires who sap the life out of empaths.
Energy vampires are people who feed off of the life force of others. They do this by targeting empaths or highly sensitive people.
And what treatment does she prescribe for energy vampirism? To pledge allegiance to yourself.
I pledge allegiance to myself and to my soul for which I stand. I honor my goodness, my gifts, and my talents. I commit to remaining loyal to myself.
You know, I do still wonder if genuine fascism could actually exist in America, because this country has a cowboy ethos that doesn't really lend itself to collectivism. But I do think that fascism can take various forms, and if it sometimes appears more spiritual, sometimes more quote-unquote scientific, then I think maybe it can sometimes appear more collectivist and maybe more individualist. In America, we have the individualistic version of fascism playing out to the extreme. In my weird, sad country, the central conflict revealed by the coronavirus pandemic is that epidemiology, the study of disease at the level of society, fundamentally is in conflict with individualism. For Americans, maybe for North Americans in general, the terrifying collective truth of public health is that disease is basically not in the realm of individual control. And a lot of Americans, especially more affluent Americans, cannot accept that something important is not in their control. The paradox within conspirituality, which I think justifies our use of the extreme term fascism, is that the clinging to individual control leads a lot of people to support authoritarianism in the form of someone like Donald Trump. I guess you could say even cowboys need a daddy. Part 5, Wellness Culture and the Denial of Death. Anthropologist Ernest Becker, in his 1973 book, The Denial of Death, says, quote, "Consciousness of death is the primary repression, not sexuality." The idea is that Freud is wrong, that sex is the fundamental taboo, and in fact is the realization that we personally are going to die. That is just too much for us, we can't handle it, and we will do anything to deny it. Sometimes this is subtle, so Becker points to Homeric heroics and heroic Homerics as a case of people trying to conquer mortality through memorable actions. I feel like we all do some version of this. Most people want to live beyond their life, whether it's in the form of having children or making YouTube videos. But sometimes the denial of death is more literal, like people actually straight up refusing to even intellectually acknowledge that they will die. And nowhere is that more prevalent than in wellness culture. The denial of death is the root of a lot of the really insidious ableism and fat phobia. There's this karmic idea that, if you're sick, if you're disabled, if you're overweight, that is a reflection of a spiritual failure on your part. If you die of cancer, that must be a karmic consequence of some wellness sins you have committed. And that kind of denialism is taken to, what you would think would be impossible extremes in a lot of New Age cults. For example, The Love Has Won cult, led by Amy Carlson, aka Mother God, was so in denial about Amy's death from a combination, it seems, of alcoholism, anorexia, and colloidal silver poisoning, hence the blue color of her skin, that they casually, low-key mummified her body in a sleeping bag, wrapped the woman in Christmas lights, and carried her corpse across 5 state lines. I mean, at least the ancient Egyptians really knew what they were doing when it comes to mummification, but it does have you wondering about the motivation behind some of those practices, and of the Great Pyramids for that matter. Did the seed that grew into the Great Pyramids begin with a kind of improvised denial? Or was it aliens? I see wellness culture as motivated not just by a denial of death, but also, at the same time, a desire for meaning. In Natural Causes, Barbara Ehrenreich argues that ritual is actually essential to medicine. And she's echoed by Amanda Montell, who argues in Cultish that ritual is an essential aspect of fitness culture. There's a chapter in Cultish that examines fitness cults like SoulCycle and CrossFit, where using a specialized culty vocabulary and chanting mantras is an essential part of the community that these gyms establish. Ehrenreich argues that a lot of the standard practices of Western medicine don't in fact have that strong a basis in scientific evidence, and in effect serve a basically ritual function in our healthcare system. She includes in this category the yearly physical exam, which is a kind of medical ritual of dominance and submission. Bataille would say a permitted transgression, right? This kind of unique circumstance where it's acceptable for an authority figure to ask you to strip naked and submit yourself to penetration. The underlying conflict that seems to motivate fascism and New Age and alternative medicine is a kind of war between meaning and facts, religion and science, tradition and modernity. The modern world is often experienced as full of facts, but empty of meaning. Scientific medicine is often perceived as soulless, as objectifying. When you go to the doctor, you become a collection of organ systems for diagnosis and treatment. This interaction lacks care, it lacks human connection, it lacks ritual meaning. Some kind of alternative medicine probably is needed to fill that void, but I think alternative medicine goes too far when it attacks modernity itself. A lot of the antipathy towards modernity, of whatever political origin, is based on wounded ego feelings that honestly, we all kind of just need to get over. And I think the purpose of spirituality should be to help us get over it, to help us get over the grandiose narcissist inside all of us that wants to be recognized as the center of the universe, as the immortal God. Freud said that there were 3 scientific revolutions that have wounded humanity's ego. First, the Copernican revolution, which told us that we are not the center of the universe, not even the center of the solar system. And then there was the Darwinian revolution, which said that we are not the descendants of gods, but the descendants of beasts. And there is no special magic that separates us from other animals. And then finally, there is Freud's own psychoanalytic revolution, which says that not only are we not metaphysically different from animals, but also our claim to being rational is not even very legitimate. And that reason is kind of a scum on the surface of a pond of the unconscious, where the pre-modern irrational is very much alive. I think these ego wounds are the reason why society is in kind of a constant state of rebellion against scientific rationality itself. Society has never really collectively accepted psychoanalysis. We're not ready for that yet. Freud is like a 22nd century thinker that was somehow born in the 19th century. Darwin is continuously up for debate, and it seems like increasingly Copernicus is open to being questioned again as well. Flat Earth content has been pretty rampant on the internet for the last 10 years.
My name is Logan Paul, and I think I'm coming out of the flat earth closet.
And I do think geocentrism is the endpoint of the anti-modern mood. Anti-modern movements, from quantum mysticism to Italian fascism, attack modernity by attacking reason. Umberto Eco says, fascism can be defined as irrationalism. Eco argues that occult fascist syncretism must tolerate contradictions, explaining them away as perspectives on the same perennial truth. Dan Olson argues that for fascists and conspiracy theorists, contradiction and falsehood are a show of strength. If you are a fascist who considers the will to power not just as psychology but as metaphysics, then what greater flex is there than to overpower logic, truth, and reality itself? The strategy is to defeat democracy by defeating reason. And we can reconsider that QAnon Shaman interview that I opened this tangent with in light of this. The shaman argues, first, that the violence on January 6th was in fact committed by Antifa and Black Lives Matter.
I think it's more like the deep state setup riots than Trump riots. I don't think Trump had people do that. I think it was more likely that the feds and the crowd and Antifa and BLM were largely responsible. And
then he argues that it was actually all the fault of the deep state for not allowing the National Guard to intervene.
No, what I'm saying, dude, is that it was a setup on behalf of the deep state. If they allowed the National Guard to be there, it never would have happened.
And finally, he argues that the insurrection was in fact a noble patriot uprising against a stolen election.
You're saying it was Antifa and the FBI, but aren't you evidence that that's not the case, Jake?
Q most certainly did send me, ladies and gentlemen. Q is the highest levels of the military, and they are disseminating above top secret information to patriots in our republic so that we can take back our country from the communists and the globalists.
Is three completely contradictory explanations offered in quick succession. And I think that we should interpret this not as confusion on his part, but as a deliberate use of contradiction as a flex. Echo says that for fascists, thinking is a form of emasculation, which is both a strength and a weakness. Fascist governments are condemned to lose wars because they're constitutionally incapable of objectively evaluating the force of the enemy. Likewise, the magical thinking of wellness culture rejects science so that it can assert the power of individual mind and spirit, to return to the infantile delusion of the omnipotence of thoughts. The disconnection from reality is their weakness, but the promise of meaning is a strength. Leftist structural analysis often makes people feel powerless, anxious, guilty, or angry, whereas New Age spirituality is soothing, and most people will choose to be soothed rather than choosing misery. New Age magic makes you feel important, safe, in control.
Cause it's my reality and some may think it's not conceited. If you want it, just believe it.
But it is a delusion, a denial of death, and to me, that's not spirituality. That's anti-spirituality. I think spirituality, if it's good for anything at all, shouldn't it help us yield to death, to chaos, to non-self? The spirituality of wellness culture often instructs us to cling ever more desperately to self, to immortality, to delusions of omnipotence, and that to me is worse than materialism. Plato said that philosophy is learning how to die, training for death, but I guess that's kind of a downer.
Your ancestors are watching you, they see you fapping ferociously to another man.
Hard iron sharpens iron, as they say.